Hello, my name is Dr. Timothy Bolin, and I'm a sociology professor at Palo Verde College in Blythe, California. It's a high desert community, and I have experiences working in other desert communities such as Victor Valley College, as well as College of the Desert. And I'm here to talk about social emotional learning from a sociological lens. So, what is SEL from a sociological lens? So, setting the context. So, sociology mostly talks about how we form relationships from a social perspective. So, the importance of relationships is key to understanding ourselves and how we relate with others in society. And it's from this lens that I want to take a look at what it means to build SEL through sociology. So, one of the ethical principles I think we could kind of hang our hat on in sociology is a quote by Martin Buber. Martin Buber was a theologian and philosopher from the 20th century who was troubling the atrocities that happened in the 20th century and trying to center ethics and religion and spirituality and philosophies and society in a place that was grounded in the other person. So his quote that we hear coming from him is, "Through the thou a person becomes an I. Through the thou a person becomes an I." What Martin Buber is talking about here is the sacredness of the other and how we truly can't be ourselves without that relationship to the other person. So quite literally, I cannot be me without you. I cannot be me without my partner. I cannot be me without my parents or my students. That these relationships are literally what create us and how we become who we are. So how does this relate to SEL? So my teaching practice at Palo Verde College is primarily with incarcerated students. The student population at Palo Verde College is 60 to 70% incarcerated students, and we do education through what is called the correspondence modality, meaning that everything is done through the USPS mail system. So having never taught in this modality before, having worked only in limited capacity with incarcerated students, had to look back and figure out how we're going to do this and how am I going to become an effective teacher. So using sociology and using my understanding of relationships as a way to break down and develop teaching practices based on the relationships with the students that I have. So what does that look like? So I have this module that I developed, the relational pyramid between students and teachers. So essentially asking myself, and as a teacher, what are students and teachers bringing with them into the classroom? So at this pyramid goes from a wide to a more narrow version of understanding context in the classroom space. So what are students bringing with them in the social context? This is macro level sociology, so the big pictures in our society, so such as race, class, gender, ability, and disability. So how do these big ideas affect a student and teachers? How do they affect us in the classroom context? So when we're looking around ourselves, trying to understand the social context that the students in our community have along the lines of race, class, and gender, and how this affects their ability to relate. So what are students bringing with them in the second tier here at the community context? So this is local and community specific beliefs. So this could go anywhere from we're talking about local belief systems, so the predominant cultural, religious, or spiritual values of a community, but also to little quirks or nuances. So working at Victor Valley College, often would commiserate with my students about the traffic on Bear Valley Road. This idea that I'm late because of the traffic on Bear Valley Road, I can't get to class on time. So it's understanding these sort of contexts, whether they're big or small, and to better understand and build a relationship with students. And finally, how do these first two layers, so understanding the base layers of social and community context, how do those inform what goes on in the classroom? So when we think about a classroom setting, we think that we have to think more broadly than only what we have around us at the present moment. So whenever we enter a classroom, we're bringing with us maybe like a suitcase, a metaphorical suitcase, the social and community context that we each bring with us as teachers and also students And how do we impact these things, and how do we relate with each other in the classroom? So 3 principles to think of alongside here. There's more agency with each layer as we go up. So from the base layer, social context, as teachers, we can't do as much about what happens socially. So race, class, and gender, how this affects society outside the classroom. But as we go further up, we have more agency in what to do. So as we go up to the community context, we could affect local belief systems more with more agency. And finally, in the classroom setting, we have the most ability as teachers to work with our students. And importantly, though we can't change these base layers, we can better understand the social and community context to better work with our students. So finally, this third principle, using relational knowledge, the knowledge we built with our students to better understand them, and how do we co-create the classroom setting. Okay, so what does this look like in practice? So I'm going to go through, I did some research and a better understanding of my students, and since primarily this is done through writing, is to share some of these writings that not only illustrate the importance of local, community, and classroom context, but to also show how we could use the information that we have access to better understand students and build relationships. So what does this look like in practice? So like I said, Palo Verde College, primarily working with incarcerated students. 60 to 70% of the student population are incarcerated. And we do this entirely through the correspondence education, so entirely through USPS mail system, and we have to presume that they only have access to textbook and the printed assignments. So in this context, students aren't meeting in classrooms, they don't have access to the internet, it's the mail and the textbook. And so how do we use the tools that we have in that limited context to foster a good student-teacher relationship? So there's 2 things we're going to be moving towards. I'm going to point ahead before we get to them. The professional pen-pal relationship is what I would categorize it. So overall, after engaging with the relational pyramid, understanding social, community, and classroom context to build a relationship, come to the conclusion that it looks something like a professional pen-pal relationship, overall building student-teacher relationships, learning through context, and sharing, within reason, my own motivations, interests, and context. So specifically, understanding social, local, and classroom context to build the relationship. And I'll show you what that conclusion looks like as we get into it. And finally, it is the consequences. So we've talked outside of this about the school to prison pipeline, or the tendency for things like social, community, and classroom context to coincide with incarceration. Meaning that students who reach obstacles based on these different measures are often more associated with being incarcerated in the system. So broader systemic levels we may not be able to affect as directly in the classroom, but being able to understand these things and challenge them. So looking ahead, I have several quotes at each of the 3 layers, social, local, and classroom, that both illustrate the importance of understanding the students from my own teaching practices, but also illustrate the tendency then for students who are incarcerated to have had negative experiences in these different areas, whether social, community, or the classroom setting, to have greatly affected their lives and perhaps contributed to the school or prison pipeline. So go through this one at the social context level. Student 4 had several observations about the education system. When I was reintegrated in the U.S. institutions from Mexico, the children were behind in my class and I disengaged from the learning, created my own entertainment, was labeled a, quote, problem child. Even though I think public education is great for low-income families because it keeps children in a safe environment, provides them with food so they do not go hungry, there are limits to how far a non-white child can reach in school. Thus acknowledging the class and racial aspects of being in this context, but also seeing that these didn't bear out equally in their ability to navigate the school system. It goes on to say, I know that for a fact the high school I attended was more worried about the percentage of colored kids attending than to provide the kids with the education they needed to become something more than a high school graduate. Finally, I see public institutions such as school are designed to prepare kids to become part of the labor force according to your social class. It's again acknowledging that where we end up with in life is very much connected with the experiences we have in schooling. Moving up a layer to the community context. The student observes of the education system and the importance of the community context, that social change in society takes place with the evolution of norms and trends currently dominating society at large. Education needs to reflect our experience outside of school in order to maintain harmony between our participation in school and society. So, this acknowledging that experience in the classroom needs to be reflective of what's going on outside. So, the local context, the community context of a student's cultural or religious backgrounds, belief systems should be reflected in the classroom setting as best as possible to build relationships and to help the student reintegrate and integrate themselves into the broader social frame. Finally, classroom context, we have a negative, and then I'll follow up with a positive view. This negative one reflecting the possibilities of schooling, facilitating the lead into the prison pipeline. Student one, I remember a particular instance in which I was being disruptive in class, so much so that I got the teacher pretty upset. I told her I was sorry, but she wasn't satisfied with that and went on to tell me, "Sorry? You sure are sorry. A sorry excuse for an individual. You're ignorant and a waste of time." The whole class grew quiet, and I said nothing else after that, and I never went back to that class again. Further, another experience in high school that speaks not only to the positive possibilities of a teacher intervening, but also the negatives of not being caught in time. While I was in high school, I was underachieving so much I was mistakenly placed in a special needs class. I sat in that class and observed and was immediately struck by the kindness and patience of the teacher because it contrasted that of my normal teacher so starkly. Her kindness motivated me to help these kids, so I mimicked her quiet and patient demeanor and began helping some of the kids with their work. She noticed I had to be removed from the class. I understand it wasn't a punishment. I simply did not belong in that class. Although I don't remember that teacher's name, I remember the experience well enough 26 years later. Meaning these classroom experiences stick with us. And when the other contexts are negative, a single intervention can help change trajectories. A observation, understanding of the classroom context or where that student was coming from. Finally, in a positive context, these are some of the things that help lead to or reflect my practices as a teacher and understanding what it means to build relationships, the importance of it. So in this class, you showed me that a teacher does care. It took 50 years to see that and to change my mind. I was going to drop because I thought you would not be able to read and see my words. Thank you for the good words, and thank you for hearing me. A second student, student 2, I know you are very busy with your responsibilities, so I want to thank you for your gracious words regarding my reading reflection. I appreciate the interaction you have devoted in our sociology class. It's very refreshing. Thank you for taking the time to read this letter. Any response you choose to give will receive much thanks. I look forward to hearing your thoughts and counsel. Both these students were seeking mentorship regarding where they wanted to go after school, what they want to do it with after graduating in the through the community college program. And with these, there was this layer of going beyond what the sociology class was talking about and an openness to talk philosophically or theologically, which helped demonstrate that we can have these conversations beyond the classroom, and we're able to go in and to use those conversations to help build mentorship possibilities. So results, and why is this important? So what this developed into is the professional pen-pal relationship. So as stated earlier, overall building student-teacher relationships, learning through context and sharing within reason, my own motivations and interests and context. So understand the social context of the incarcerated students, the roles racism, classism, ability and disability discrimination play in a student's experience. Also, as we saw, looking at the local context, the severe restrictions and isolation that students faced, delays in grading, lockdowns specifically and particularly during the pandemic, missing resources and even postal delays, so not having books, assignments getting lost in the mail. So understanding these contexts and adjusting appropriately, whether that meant moving due dates and deadlines, being understanding, responding to worried messages about these delays. And so along with the classroom context, so there literally was no classroom, the isolation and missing socialization parts. So using these three layers to respond with building relationships through correspondence discussions, doing things like mentorships and career or school planning, such as with the two students who were seeking mentorship advice, a student sharing his interest in theology and helping provide resources to suggest places that they could go upon graduation. So, having broader discussions of theological, philosophical, or even prison issues going on in their experiences in the class, and using these as a way to both mentor and share, and broadly just to build a better relationship to move these classroom spaces forward. So, what does this mean more broadly? Why is this important? I think in our daily classroom practices, outside of the carceral system, I think very similar things apply. Going into my class contexts that aren't in with incarcerated students, building those relationships, understanding where students are coming from, and using the sociological lens, understanding social, community, and local context to help build up these relationships. And moreover, what this looks like broadly for these students in particular is to understand that these contexts have consequences. So social, community, and classroom contexts are consequential. And how these obstacles can lead to things like the school to prison pipeline, and how we could help collaboratively and relationally, we could help be a part of the healing process. So working together with the students, we could help build these student-teacher relationships and build these relationships that could have not only successful teaching practices, but to truly work towards transforming our experiences with education. Thank you.